The ideas expressed in the following presentations are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ACI or its committees. ACI web sessions are recorded at ACI conventions or other concrete industry events and will be made available for viewing free of charge for 1 week. Thereafter, they will be archived on the ACI website or added to ACI's Online CEU Program, depending on their content. You can earn continuing education credits through ACI's Online CEU Program. Visit www.concrete.org to register. ACI conventions provide an opportunity for networking and for keeping up to date with the latest in concrete technology and practices.
I'm going to talk about 4 different little techniques that I've implemented in the classroom. This is, primarily aimed at faculty members, but I'm hoping those of you that teach in other capacities or in other venues could still find something of interest, with respect to how you might teach, and then also just how you might learn. Because the only reason to teach is to assist in the learning process, and so it's always interesting to think about how people learn and conceptualize things. So I'm going to get right into it. The first one I'm going to talk about is student written examinations. So this is an interesting and fun technique that I've implemented several times with great success. The motivation to do this, well, first off, we basically have 2 primary roles when we're handling a classroom as a faculty member, right? Our 2 primary goals are, number 1, to assist the students in learning. Okay, that's by far the biggest one. But second of all, we're supposed to evaluate the students based on the learning objectives for the course. How well do they actually understand these things by assigning a grade? Okay? Quite often people think that these 2 processes have to be mutually exclusive, and it's simply not the case. The evaluation process can certainly encompass learning as well. And so that's motivation number 1. Turns out students often have trouble directing their studying efforts towards things that are important, and this is actually a means to get them to better direct their studying efforts towards things that are important. And there's lots of evidence, if you read the literature on pedagogy and so on, that when you do turn over the classroom and give students more control over the learning process, that it usually has very good results. And then the final one, of course, is, I tell the students this one all the time. It's because I'm, essentially Homer Simpson's my role model, right? I'm lazy. I want them to do all the work. It actually is more work to do this, but I don't tell them that. So how do I actually implement this thing? Well, so I assigned it as a final homework. Okay, the students have to write these questions for the last homework assignment in the class. And I have them, depending on the size of the class, how many students are in there, I'll have them either work individually or in groups of 2, and they'll write 6 to 10 final exam questions each. I give them a list of the different topics and subject matter that we've covered over the course of the semester. I want it to be all-inclusive, and I want to get questions from all of these topics, so I require that they cover at least 6 distinct topics in their questions. Of course, those that cover multiple topics are great, because that means it's that they're tying different concepts together. They have to include some possible incorrect answers, okay, as well as the correct answer. And then I post all these questions and the answers that the students have submitted to me online prior to the final exam. Okay, so they can actually see all the questions that were submitted to me. So this is, on the right here, this is just the handout that I give them, instructing them how to go ahead and do this for this final homework. So how do I assure that we're actually producing a good exam for them to take? Well, so I receive maybe 300 questions, and I spend a lot of time reading through every single one of these and weed them down to the top 50 or 60 questions of those submitted. What I found is usually out of about 300 questions, you'll get 50 to 60 really good questions, and then 200 and some not so great. And in order to help assure that I get at least 50 to 60 really good questions, I tell them I'll give you 2 extra credit points added to your final exam score for every question of yours that I choose. And so that's extra motivation. Hey, if I write good questions that Dr. Grasley is going to choose, then they're going to end up on the final exam and I get better score. I don't have the students write the first 2 midterms. I do that, in part because I want to train them to think about conceptual problems, what are the things that are important in the class, and to sort of learn what I think is important and how I identify those things that are conceptually important in the text and in the lectures and so on. And so the first two exams serve in some sense as a training process for them identifying the concepts of interest. So one important point here is, based on this also, the fact that I write the first two midterms, students have given me the reputation that I have really tough exams. They say they learn a lot in the class, but my exams are really difficult. Therefore, students expect that I somehow really like challenging questions. That's important because later on they essentially will try and choose questions or write questions that I will choose, and so therefore they think that I like really complicated questions, so they will immediately direct their studying towards the thing that they found the most complicated in the topics that we covered. So it helps direct their studying to those things that they found conceptually challenging. So these are just a couple of example questions that the students have come up with for exams. I just kind of chose these. So they had a question on corrosion. This is for an undergraduate materials science course for civil engineers. So it deals with many different aspects of material science that are relevant to civil engineers. And so they had a question about preventing corrosion here. You can go ahead and see what they came up with. They also had a question about thermal expansion and stresses in restrained thermal expansion. So, and these were just kind of average questions. These aren't exceptional, but they're good. They touched on a lot of the topics that we wanted. It also shows that they can be conceptual in nature, or they could involve calculations. Okay? In this case, these were multiple choice examinations, in part because these were done at Texas A&M when I was on the faculty there, and often I had my final exam the day before grades were due, and I had 80 students. And so it sort of forced me into doing multiple choice. You certainly wouldn't have to do it using multiple choice if you have more time to actually grade the things. So the benefits of doing all of this, again, I mentioned the students think that I like hard questions based on the first couple exams that I write, and so they self-direct themselves to material they found challenging. So I mentioned the students often say that they have trouble, focusing their studying when they're studying for a traditional final exam. This way, it helps them. They essentially learn the challenging material in order to write a good question and answers. So they force themselves to learn. You have to understand the material if you're going to write a good quality question and potential wrong answers or pitfalls that the other students might fall into if they don't fully understand the material. So it's more focused studying. The feedback that I've gotten from students after doing this is they say that they actually spend more time studying for the exams that they write. Because part of the process of that studying is coming up with the exam questions. So kind of interesting and fun. Students like it. I mean, I've gotten positive feedback from it. They just say they've learned more doing that. So, okay. Another thing that I do is I utilize cell phone polling. And so I'm going to ask everybody to get out their cell phone and violate that commandment you were given at the very beginning, and go ahead and vote on this. Okay? So the way you vote is you send a text message, and you send it to 37607, and then in the text you write out one of these answers for your vote. Okay? So the question is, concrete is the most widely consumed material in the world after water, superior to asphalt and steel in every way, an industry full of exceptionally bright individuals, or all of the above. So I use these little polls, especially when I'm doing longer lectures, to break them up a little bit. In a sense, it's very similar to the clickers that a lot of people have utilized in the past. A big difference is I can do this anywhere I have an internet connection. Okay, and it requires no hardware, and students actually enjoy getting out their cell phones and sending text for some reason. I'm actually not a text person. I don't send text, but anyways. So what's the winner here? All of the above. Okay, you can tell we're at ACI, right? Okay, so, it's kind of fun. The typical attention span of the students, studies put the number kind of all over the place. One of the more generous ones is actually 15 minutes. So, my attention span, I'm pretty sure, is less than that. I think I sort of drift off sometimes when I'm giving presentations and lectures, so if I do, just start coughing really loud. And so polls can, thank you. So polls can be used to pique interest or provoke thought on some sort of a new topic that I'm going to be moving into. So quite often I give questions that don't really have a clear answer. So these are just some examples that I'll ask. So before I start moving into some topics on fracture mechanics, for instance, and flaws inside of materials, I might ask this question, which has a higher ultimate strength, a 4-inch diameter concrete cylinder or a 24-inch diameter concrete cylinder, to introduce the concept of flaws and size effect in structures. And so these are the answers that they would give. A lot of them would, say the strengths are going to be the same. They've learned about strength theory and they're talking about ultimate stress at failure, and they think, well, we're normalizing the force by the cross-sectional area. They've got to be the same. And so then I show them their answers and I say, I probably disagree with the majority here, and we're going to see why. And then it kind of gets them thinking about, why am I wrong about this? Same thing with the second question, which material is most likely to corrode away? I show this right after showing the standard hydrogen potentials. And I talk about how, it determines what the anode and the cathode are when you couple two metals together. And they look and they see aluminum is way down on that list. And they think, okay, Dr. Grasley just said that's going to form the anode, so that's going to be the one that's going to corrode away. And then I show this, they vote, and I say, okay, well, I haven't given you the whole story, because we haven't talked about things like passive films and other things like this yet. And so it kind of piques their interest a little bit. So the benefits here, provocative questions make students pay attention, following the poll. Tends to re-energize the class, breaks it up. If they've started drifting off and thinking about their laundry or their boyfriend or their girlfriend after 15 minutes, you can start to bring them back in a little bit. It's a means for simply quantifying class participation as well. If you have a very large class, you can track which students have actually submitted something. You can't actually get their phone number or any personal information, but what you do is the first day of the semester, you have a poll that says, just a text poll rather than a multiple choice, where they enter their last name and their first initial. And what that does is it ties then the code, when every time they vote there's a code that's associated with their vote, and it ties the code to their name. And so then you don't have to take attendance or do any of this or measure class participation in other means. You have a spreadsheet at the end of the semester. You can see who is actually there voting. So simple. And again, it's a lot like the clickers, but you don't need any kind of infrastructure. Basically, every student has a phone. I think in 4 years, I found one student that couldn't send text messages because it was disabled, and I told him just write the answer on a piece of paper and turn it in every day. But that's like one time in 4 years. That's probably like 400 students. Okay. The other thing that I like to do is utilize the tablet PC. I also use it with a wireless communicator a lot of times, so I can actually walk around the class with the tablet, and especially in big classrooms, then I can engage the class. I'm not tied to the podium. I'm also not tied to a blackboard. And so the motivation here is, PowerPoint, it's gotten a lot of complaints and a lot of criticism over the years. It does still have some benefits. You can show video on it. That's really nice in some cases. You can show complex graphics and data. That's also really nice. It's clear, it's legible, unlike my writing. But PowerPoint has deserved a lot of its criticism that it's received as a teaching tool over the years. It encourages passive students, okay? I mean, there's a lot of you out right now that are just kind of starting to doze off, so it's because of the PowerPoint, not because of me. It does not moderate pace effectively, okay? This is one of the biggest issues, is the students, they can't keep up, so they just give up, taking notes, and there's more information there than what's really relevant or important even, for that matter. They can't tell what's important because there's so much information there. So it has its downsides. And Chalk Talk, using the blackboard or the whiteboard, likewise has, some downsides, but also has some positives. And so the idea is to try and find a nice marriage between the two, so you can use the benefits of both. And I don't know if I've effectively done that or not, but I've certainly tried. And so what I'll do is I'll create a PowerPoint lecture, but I leave off a lot of the things that I consider to be pertinent or important information. I do distribute those PowerPoint lectures prior to class with the missing information. But then during the course of the lecture, I take time out to solve problems on the screen within the PowerPoint slide, or to add information or to highlight things that are really important by writing on the screen. And I think that it forces me to slow down, first of all. It also, the students, even if they're starting to fade off, as soon as they see me start to write something, they're like, okay, this is really important information, but they still have some of the other stuff, the graphs and things like that are hard to reproduce in their notes. They've got it right there alongside their handwritten stuff, or they're even drawn on the graphs. So, it has some advantages. In the handwriting, usually I link that to my learning objectives. So those things that I introduce at the beginning of a lecture as the learning objectives for that given lecture, a lot of the times those are the things that I spend time writing on the slides and spending extra time. So this is just an example slide with my chicken scratching. This is my own writing. I try to write neater than that when I'm actually presenting it for the class. But so this is talking about porosity in concrete and why it's important. So increased pore volume, leads to all of these very important issues. When you change the pore size distribution, you get this effect. And then, I talk about some of these definitions of the different types of porosity. And so I could have included all of this up there without handwriting it in front of the class. But the fact is, if they take the time to actually write these things out, they're more likely to retain them. So that's just an example. There's lots of different ways that I bring that into the class. The last thing I'm going to talk about is student-derived analogies. And so the question down here is, what drives true understanding? And there's a large body of literature on pedagogy that says the way that humans learn things is that they have some pre-existing framework inside of their brain based on their past experiences and things that they've seen and witnessed and felt and touched and so on. And to truly understand something is to grasp that thing and place it into your pre-existing framework. So make connections between those things that you already understand to this new abstract concept. So as an example, if you understand the relationship between A and B, okay, and then you're presented with something abstract, that C, that relates to D somehow, but you don't really understand that, if you make the connection that C relates to D in the same way that A relates to B, you're good. You understand it. So there's a large body of literature that suggests that, and my thinking was, well, maybe I'll develop a bunch of analogies in class and then, use that. After discussions with my NSF program manager at the time, he suggested, well, maybe the students should actually derive them themselves, which is actually a fantastic idea. So, and I don't say that just because he's sitting here. So, and so that's what I did. I had the students help derive analogies. The benefit to doing that rather than me developing them is that there's a risk that the analogy doesn't tie to their current framework of understanding. Okay, so you have to make sure that the analogy ties to their base, not my base. And so if they're developing them, they can ensure that that's the case. So, and I've got a nice quote down here showing that this idea of using analogies as a teaching tool goes back before me. So, a couple thousand years anyways. So the methodology here, step one, this development of a concept inventory. This is a little bit of a tangential issue, but I did this in order to evaluate whether or not the analogies were actually improving learning. So how do you assess whether having students develop analogies is beneficial or not? How do you assess whether any technique is advantageous or not? Very difficult to do, but a concept inventory helps. And so a concept inventory is essentially a series of questions that are very conceptual in nature on concepts that you expect the students could potentially have preconceived misconceptions. And these are concepts that you intend to address during the course of this class and are intimately related to your learning objectives. Okay? So you basically give this the first day of class, have them take it, and then you don't talk about it the rest of the semester, and you give it to them again at the last day of class. Same questions. And you track whether or not they've actually improved. You never give them the answers or anything during the semester. You just see if they've improved. So in the middle of the semester, of course, you implement whatever your innovation is that you want to test to see if it works or not. For example, having students develop analogies, and then you compare, semesters with and without student-derived analogies to evaluate. So basically, I would assign a homework, and every homework assignment, the last problem would be generate an analogy that relates to this concept that happens to be the one we've been talking about in class. They'd work in small groups to develop these, and then they would actually post these on a Facebook-like website, and then I'd tell them, all right, the last thing you got to do is go in and rank everybody else's analogies. Which ones do you think are most appropriate, are the strongest analogies that help you learn the concept? And the idea there was to help train them to write good analogies, because there's actually some danger in bad analogies. Once you develop a bad analogy for something, it's very hard to break, so you have to be careful with that. Here's an example analogy that some students came up with, so I'll let you read that. So they're talking here about the force-distance relationship for atomic bonding, for instance, for like van der Waals attraction and repulsion and so on. So anyways, that's just one of the ones they came up with. So the goal here was, again, students can improve their understanding of abstract concepts through the use of analogies. The concept inventory was used to determine whether or not this was actually working. And so I use that to track improvement. This is an example concept inventory question now that I use for evaluation purposes. So this is a conceptual question dealing with thermal properties. Okay? So this is one that I actually wrote. So just kind of a conceptual question. A large number of students won't get this at the beginning of the semester. Okay? So this is the data, and it's about, looks like, concrete strength results or something in the amount of scatter you see here, but there is some trend there. What I'm showing here is the improvement in the concept inventory scores. So that's what you see here, percent improvement, versus the rating of the analogies based on their peers. So the idea here was, is there any link between the quality of the analogies that they write versus how well they actually improve their understanding of some of these concepts? And there's not a steep of a slope here is what I would have liked, but there is some trend. The trend is actually even stronger between their grade and the analogy rating, which actually, I didn't look at their ratings when I assigned grades. It wasn't until after I'd already submitted all the grades that I went and said, okay, let me see if the grades that they achieved in the course had any correlation to the strength of the analogies that they were writing, and there was a reasonably strong correlation there. So, that was a nice finding. So, students that derive high-quality analogies improve their scores more than their peers, and they get higher grades. I mentioned this. The primary challenge is to help them derive appropriate analogies, because if you get a bad analogy, it can actually really reinforce misconceptions. So you have to be aware of that and really nip that in the bud when you're using these student-derived analogies. So to summarize, a few novel teaching techniques were presented, 4 of them. So having students write their exams, that one is actually really easy to implement in a hurry. In-class cell phone polling, that one, again, is really easy. You can get a free account with polleverywhere.com if anybody's interested. It's polleverywhere.com. Okay. If you have a big class, you've got to pay some kind of monthly fee, so they'll limit the number of people that can actually phone in their votes. But if you've got a small class, it's free. The use of the tablet PC, so combining writing and slowing down your PowerPoint lectures with writing, and then student-derived analogies. I talked about concept inventories and how they can be used as a means to quantify student learning. There's actually several of these concept inventories out there available for different fields of study. I didn't invent the concept. Okay, there's several people. In fact, the first one was in physics, I believe, probably from about 15, 20 years ago now, maybe, something like that. But if you just do a search for concept inventory, you'll find various quizzes that you can utilize for various fields of study. Pretty much all of these are pretty easy to implement, which is what I like, because again of that Homer Simpson, as being my role model. So I like things that are easy. And I think it has led to some documented improvement in student learning, and actually it's fun. The students get a kick out of it, and honestly I'd be bored if I just went and just stood up and talked for 50 minutes or an hour every time I had a lecture. I'd probably not be in this profession if I had to do that. So it's fun for me too. And with that, just an acknowledgement to NSF for paying the bills. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Hopefully there's a few minutes for that.
Do you find that the tablet PC concept where you're stopping and filling in blanks electronically on the PowerPoint, that they're then writing it on their paper PowerPoint, I assume?
Absolutely, that's what they're doing.
Is that, how different would that be than just stopping and going to the whiteboard?
Essentially it's not, except for 2 major differences. One, a lot of classrooms you have to choose, meaning your screen comes right down in front of your chalkboard. Yeah, you have a choice. So in some cases you have that problem. The other issue is if you're writing it on your screen, you save your file afterwards, you have exact record of exactly what you wrote. So there's never any question. Whiteboards get erased unless you're taking pictures afterwards or something. That's the beauty. So I said you have record, the students, So that's another difference. And then the final difference is if you incorporate also the wireless connectivity, the chalkboard still ties you to the front of a room. And I've taught in a room where it was a computer lab, actually, and it was deeper than this room and about this wide, and there was a small whiteboard at the front, okay? And it was much more effective for me to put it on the screen because of the size, number one, and then also I could engage the students in the back because I could walk to the back as I'm writing. I can just hold it in my hand, I can go anywhere in the classroom. I'm not tied to the front, which a podium or a chalkboard does. So, yeah. Yes?
Your student-written exams, you said you post all the questions and the answers online?
Yep.
Ahead of time for them?
Yep.
What's the purpose of that?
So I post all of the questions and all of the answers. What I don't do is I don't mark the answer that the students who wrote the question said is the correct answer. Okay, so they don't see the correct answer. They just see that there's 300 questions. They don't know which ones I'm going to choose. They don't know any of that. So I also warn them that I'm going to read every one of these questions, and if it needs to be reworded in any way, I will do so. If the answers that the other students chose are not appropriate, I will choose the correct one or write a different answer. So they know that I can modify slightly these things, okay? They're aware of that. I also tell them that if I can't find 50 or 60 good questions, I will write the hardest exam I've ever written in my entire life. And so they know that, they know that that's a great starting point. They know, though, that there's a risk that if they only look at that stuff, then they're in trouble. And I also encourage them, look, you better understand the concept behind each one of these questions, because if I have to change it up a little bit, if you just, talk to the person who wrote it, sometimes they would start like some kind of a Facebook group or something or whatever, I don't know, and try and communicate their answers. I said, that's fine, you can share your answers, but be aware they may not be right. These are your classmates you're counting on here. And so I think they actually will spend hours and hours and hours going over these questions. A lot more time than they would if they were just studying on their own, because they would just look over the notes and be like, yeah, that made sense to me. So they, at least them spending more time on their studying, I guess, is the primary motivation.
And you use this in class sizes of what range?
I have used it in classes ranging from, say, 30 to 100. But I think it's something you could adapt and use in virtually any class size, to be honest. So, actually, I think John Popovich was doing something similar when I was there in a graduate course, which was a smaller number. And those were not multiple choice. And that's, essentially where I got the initial idea to start implementing this was from his. I don't know if you ever did it in undergraduate courses or not.
No, I haven't.
Okay, just in the grad course. Well, you should.
It's only 600 to 1,000.
600 to 1,000. Well, you need somebody else to go over the questions then for you. Any other questions?
Okay,
Well, thanks for your attention.
Let's give Zach a big hand.